Alright, so this is my first discussion on the first reading assignment, which was on What Should I Do? Chapters 1 through 2, Effective Classroom Management, chapters 1 through 3, and Teaching the Taboo, chapters 1 through 2. So I will start with What Should I Do? And these, again, as I said, were chapters 1 and 2. So just a quick overview with this. In the first chapter, obviously, she introduces what she's going to be talking about, which is different dilemmas that novice teachers may face, specifically in an urban school setting. So she starts off with chapter 1, obviously defining what a dilemma is, and she defines teaching dilemmas as situations that require teachers to make a decision for which there is no easy or right answer. So in the same chapter, she also compares it to what a problem is, and obviously, as we know, a problem is something that is usually, if you reason through it and you solve it, so there is a possible solution for it, versus a dilemma that makes it more difficult for teachers because you never really know the right answer. There is no easy answer for a teacher dilemma, which is what the whole book is talking about, and which we will continue to explore as we continue reading. So she also talks about how she's going to include different narratives of different teachers who have faced different dilemmas in urban schools. But just for the sake of chapter 1, again, she is defining what a dilemma is, comparing it to what a problem is, what a teaching dilemma is, comparing it to what a problem is. And she also talks about how you should consider the context. So again, like a teacher who works in a wealthy school versus a teacher who's going to work in a lower income school is going to face different teaching dilemmas. So as I've said, the whole point of a dilemma isn't that you're going to find the right answers. So what she says is that you're going to need to predict what dilemmas you may face depending in what type of environment you will find yourself in. So for this particular book, she's talking about urban schools, so she's going to focus on an urban school and environment, but she talks about how you should, again, read the context, because, again, a teacher who works in a wealthier school is going to have different dilemmas than the teacher who works in a lower income school. So again, context is very important. So it is extremely important to remember that schools are complex, changing places, and they're characterized by uncertainty. So as teachers, we know that it's going to be difficult. We're going to face different problems, different dilemmas. So the important thing to remember is to learn how to manage those dilemmas. And you can do that by being aware of the context of where you're working, so you can predict what type of dilemmas you may have so you can better manage them. Because again, a dilemma, there is no right or wrong answer, and you may make a mistake once, but you'll learn from it and you'll figure out that that may not have been the best solution to it. But we learn, and that's, again, why it's important to be aware of the context of where you're working, because you'll be able to better predict those dilemmas and, again, be able to better manage them. And this is all very important for us who will be teaching in the secondary level, because we will be facing different dilemmas, especially if we choose to work in urban schools, where I kind of want to work, where, there's going to be factors such as race, language, anywhere actually. Our classrooms are being filled with more and more diverse students, and again, that's why you have to be prepared to face these different dilemmas as a secondary teacher. And then, so we went on to chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 focuses mainly on developing a professional identity, and the author discusses the difficulty of doing so, because we go in thinking we know ourselves and that we have developed an identity, but then we face different situations in which we realize that it can be difficult to have that professional identity, especially when you get to know your students. So again, part of learning to teach in urban schools and developing an identity as a teacher in such a setting involves coming to better understand the context that frames the lives of the students and the students' families. So again, say I know one of the narratives talked about a teacher, and she was a black woman, and she thought that she was going to be able to better relate to her black students, yet they stereotyped her, and they kind of backed off when they saw that she wasn't entirely like them. So then she started questioning herself because she knew she was black and she knew she had her identity, but it wasn't the same as what her students saw. And she had that dilemma of she didn't know how to talk to them and make them understand that stereotypes are not always true, and that's what they were doing. They were stereotyping her, and just because she was black, they were making certain judgments. There was also another narrative in there that I found really interesting because it talked about standardization and standardized tests, which I do not fully agree with because I don't think that standardized tests properly measure our students. And one of the teachers in the book had a dilemma relating to standardized tests because she had to give out a mandatory writing exam, yet two of her students did not speak any English. So she faced the dilemma of whether or not she was having to follow the rules of giving these mandatory tests when it wasn't in her students' best interests. And when she gave the exam out because she had to, even though she didn't feel right about it, because two of her students didn't even know what they were supposed to do. They ended up just copying the prompt. And again, she questioned her identity because as a teacher, she was supposed to give out these mandatory exams, even though she knew that it wasn't the right thing to do, especially for two students who did not even understand what was going on. And again, this relates to us as secondary teachers because we will have to face this, especially English and math with the Common Core and all these standardized tests that they give out, whether or not, it's fair, especially with urban schools compared to wealthier schools and the lack of resources. I mean, the inequities are there. Students at wealthier schools have way more resources than those at students who attend urban schools. So again, chapter 2 mainly focused on developing a professional identity. Then we went on to read about effective classroom management, and we had to read chapters 1 through 3. The first chapter mainly focused on defining classroom management and what it means. And the main thing I learned here was that the important thing regarding classroom management is to prevent misbehavior, not how to deal with misbehavior. So we learned about 4 common misconceptions relating to classroom management, and one being that classroom management is synonymous with discipline. The second one being that a well-managed classroom is a quiet classroom, which we all know that is not true. The third misconception was that an effective classroom management plan relies on rewards and punishments. And then finally, the fourth misconception that the first chapter talked about was how engaging instruction is classroom management, which is also not true. So then we went on to read about how the classroom management is pretty much a process consisting of 5 key areas. So organizing the physical design of the classroom, establishing rules and routines, developing caring relationships, implementing engaging and effective instruction, and finally addressing discipline issues. So again, the importance of classroom management and the main goal of classroom management is to develop an environment conducive to academic and social emotional learning. And that is what the first chapter pretty much focused on, just giving us an overview of the details that we will be later reading as we continue to read the book. So then chapter 2 was just introducing us to the teachers and students that we will be reading about, because one of the main things is to hear the voices of the students, because usually, who better to tell us than the students themselves what they believe? And so again, chapter 2 is just giving us introduction to the students and teachers that we will be reading about as we continue to read the Effective Classroom Management book. And then chapter 3 focused and gave more detail on organizing the physical design of the classroom. And the main points here were how the physical arrangement of the classrooms has a direct influence on how much time teachers spend dealing with disruptive behavior. So for instance, the way you decide to arrange your desks, whether it's in rows or by groups or in pairs, I mean, they all have their pros and cons, so they all work, but it's more on the way you decide is best for you, because again, like I said, they all have pros and cons, but they do the effect of the student learning. And you just want to make sure that the teacher his desk or where the teacher stands is in the place where they're available for all students. So again, arrange furniture in ways that allow you to circulate and interact with all students, which is what I just mentioned. You want to be available for your students. You don't want to have them have to go out of their way to get to you, or you have to go out of your way to get to them if they have a question for you. It's also important for you to create adequate space for interaction, because it's important for collaboration, and you don't want to spend or waste too much time having students get in groups if, say, you have them in rows, or because, again, you have to plan accordingly so you don't waste too much time, because I mean that's what we don't want to happen. So again, if you have adequate space for interaction, you can have students right away just turn their desks over or push their desks together. So that's very important. Minimize traffic problems. Again, don't have too much of a crowded space. You don't want students to have to go through obstacles just to get to you or just to get to the pencil sharpener. You want to minimize traffic problems. You also want to create a pleasing environment. You want to create a safe and comfortable environment for your students, because you want to allow them to take risks. And if you don't have a safe or comfortable environment for them, if you haven't created this for them, they're not going to want to speak out or answer questions or take those risks. So it's important to create a pleasing environment for them. You must also, if you have wall space, maybe put up their work for them, because students like seeing their work. They're proud of it, and if you showcase it for them, they're going to be even more proud of it. And again, hear students' voices. So include your students in the way that you want to arrange their desks. Maybe, ask them what would be their preference, if they want to be grouped in fours, if they prefer rows, how they prefer it. You can try it out. If it doesn't work out, hey, at least you tried it, and at least they know you heard them. So again, the main thing was how important the physical environment of a classroom is. And the final book we read was Teaching the Taboo, and we had to read chapters 1 through 2. Now, chapter 1 focuses on, again, what teaching the taboo is, which is pretty much actually educating our students and teaching them to think and to critically think and to question the norm and not conform, which is what I think is very important. We need to teach our students to question, to think critically, to problem solve, and not to just go along with the way it's supposed to be. That is not okay. Again, we need to teach them to think and empower them so they become citizens in this world and not just workers that take their place in the world. No, they need to critically think, and that is the main focus of chapter 1, to actually educate our students and create people who can think for themselves, pretty much. And then chapter 2 Chapter 2 focused pretty much on what we choose to teach, and in their case they were talking about different literature, and it talked about how you should choose different literature, but literature that relates to students, so they can question it and think about it and not just analyze it and this is the theme and this is that. No, it should be literature that is rich because it relates to the students and they can apply it to their everyday experiences. So again, it just talks about how you should choose curriculum or material that relates to the values of students and teachers alike, because students will be more eager to learn when it's something that relates to things they live through every day. And again, it's more rich and they're able to question it and think about it more. And that is the end of discussion for